Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to sell more books. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from people just like you and from the most successful authors on the planet. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of my new book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Kathryn Lasky. Kathryn is the author of over 100 books for children and young adults, which is just crazy. Some of those books include the Guardians of Ga'Hoole series, which is more than 8 million copies in print and was turned into a major motion picture called The Legends of the Guardians, The Owls of Ga'Hoole. Her newest book is titled Light on Bone, a mystery. So much fun experience that we'll get to unpack here, writing children's books, writing young adult books, writing a mystery novel, turning your book into a movie. Like, there's so much that we can talk about, including the new book that's out. So Kathryn, welcome.
Oh, welcome. Very happy to be here.
So why books? You're a prolific writer. You've written a ton of books. How'd you get started, and why have you focused so much of your time and energy on books?
Well, I guess it's process of elimination. I'm not good at other things. I'm not a singer. I'm not particularly athletic. But, when I was little, I just read I still read like crazy. So I thought, well, if I could be a professional reader, I'd do that. This is when I was really, and then I thought, well, maybe I could just be a writer, or a librarian. It's just a passion for books, and it's hard to separate, for me, reading from writing. It just sort of comes naturally.
And was it always that way? Did you always read and write regularly, or was that something that kind of developed over time?
Well, I read regularly. Surely I read. And then I started writing, and I was an English major in college. And then I started writing a little bit, but just, after I graduated from college, I was a copywriter for a magazine, a fashion magazine, which I didn't particularly like that. And then I went and I got a master's degree in early childhood education, and that sort of put me on the path to children's books. And so my first book were children's books. So
and then how old were you when you wrote your first book? And how old were you when you published your first book?
Well, when I wrote and published, it was, let me just think. I was about 30, and I was about 30 or 31 when it was published. It was a very short book, and it was called I Have Four Names for My Grandfather. And it was about, and my husband's a really good photographer. He used to work for National Geographic. So it was a sort of photo story for little kids. And it was just kind of like a day in the life of a grandfather and his grandson. And the grandfather was my father, and the grandson was my sister's little boys. I didn't have any children of my own. And it just got snapped up. And I kept writing. Well, this is good. And then I moved into longer books and novels and stuff like that. Sort of like you're building a muscle.
Yeah. Did you self-publish, traditionally publish that first book?
No, it was published by Little Brown.
Okay. And how'd you get your first publishing deal for a children's book as a first-time author?
Oh, well, this would never happen anymore. But I was going to submit it and write a letter and blah, blah, blah. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is right across the river from Boston. And Little Brown at that point was in Boston. And I said, to my husband, why do I send this in? And he said, why don't you, instead of sending it in, and we hadn't even shot the pictures. I had the manuscript, very short manuscript, but we put in some sample pictures. And my husband said, well, why don't you call up and ask to talk to the children's book editor there? I said, oh, I don't know. I'm sort of shy in one way. And he said, no, do it. So I called up, and this guy, I didn't expect it. He answered his own phone. And so there were no layers to go through. And so I sort of hemmed and hawed around. I said, oh, I've written this book about a grandfather and a grandson and what they do on a day they spend together. And he said, oh, that sounds great. I was just thinking about we need more intergenerational books and stuff like that. I said, well, I'll send it in. He said, don't send it in, bring it in. And so I brought it in and my husband came with me, and we showed him some of his pictures and everything. And the editor said, I'll buy it, just like that. I mean, times were simpler, I guess. That's all you can say. So that got me rolling.
Well, I mean, I think two big takeaways there for people too are picking up the phone and actually, because if you would have just emailed them, they might would have never responded. And then also just the power of getting in person. What's that?
I said there wasn't even email then.
Oh my gosh, that's great. That's crazy. So you talked a little bit earlier about building the muscle of writing. And obviously, writing over 100 books and, children's book, young adult books, and then, all the way to your most recent book, Light on Bone.
Here, I should show you the cover. I love the cover of my book.
Yeah, I do too. I was going to ask you. So actually, let me side road on the cover, and then we'll come back to building the muscle of writing. What was the thought process behind that cover? I was looking at all your books on Amazon. It looks like a lot of your other books have a very similar style of cover, and this seems to be very different. So what was the thought process behind that?
Well, first of all, this is a grown-up book and not a kid's book, and it's a murder mystery. And because it features George O'Keeffe, the famous painter, as what you call in the business an amateur sleuth. And, she spent a lot of time out in the Southwest in New Mexico. So that was a landscape that really inspired her. So, I wanted something of the landscape. I wanted a sort of, well, this sounds like a contradiction. I wanted a sort of darkness or foreboding quality, but I didn't want it to be a black cover. So and those sunsets out there are so beautiful. And so, the title is Light on Bone, and she painted a lot of bones. So there's a cow skull down here. And so, I related all that to the art department of the publisher, and they thought those were good ideas. And they sent me several, well, I would say at least 6 or 8 possible covers. And I went with this one because I just thought it sort of captured it,
Yeah, it looks great. And for those who are watching on the YouTube channel, you can see it. If you're listening on the podcast, you can just check out the book Light on Bone on Amazon or wherever you purchase books. Kathryn, how do you said, hey, this is a grown-up book, so it needs to be different. How do you think about covers differently if you're doing a children's book or young adults book or a grown-up book? How do you do anything? How do you think about that?
Well, that's really, it's sort of a question for the publisher. But with a children's book, I didn't want anything too abstract. With this Light on Bone, it can be more abstract. I want something that, immediately grabs their attention. Now, I've written so many books about animals, and like the Guardians of Gahul. Well, it was obvious that they would need. Can I get up a minute and just get my book so I can show
You
it to
got
you?
it. Yeah.
Sure. Uh,
Because yeah, we got the Guardians of Gahul, which is the series. That's the ultimate series that got turned into a movie. You can kind of see if you're,
yeah, here it is. Well, look, of course, it's an owl. And what is more intriguing, it just grabs your attention full on than the face of an owl. So all 15 of these books have owls on the cover in some way. I mean,
Mhm.
it just I think it's an immediate connect for kids
Mm,
to see this
mm.
on the cover. So
Oh,
I hope I answered your question.
that makes sense. So putting something on the cover that's intriguing and captures the attention of the intended audience. And it sounds
Yeah,
like with the kids book, it's like, hey, there's an owl. It's an intriguing image. They know that it's an animal book, and if they like owls, they're interested in that.
yeah.
And then with Light on Bone, it's a tie-in to the theme of the book, and there's intrigue and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
That makes sense. So so kind of back to the writing muscle question.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I mean, obviously extremely prolific as a writer and as an author. How have you built that muscle? And how is that muscle different depending, like, how do you approach these books differently, whether you're writing a children's book, young adult book, adult mystery?
Well, with a children's book, there might only be 1,300 words in it, if that. Um, so, it always starts out with you have to have a story, no matter whether it's for kids or adults, with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, you don't necessarily have to stick religiously to that. I mean, you can have an idea for the beginning and that can change, but you got to start out with a beginning, middle, and an end. And it's like making a sketch of the book in a way, or a very faint outline, which you can always change. And that's the same with every book, whether it's for kids or adults. And then um, it gives you a map of sorts, and you move from one point on the map to another. By the end of a book, I might have as many as a dozen outlines, and they keep getting longer and longer because you keep adding to them and say, oh, well, I could do this here in the middle of the book or that. So these elaborate outlines, granted, it's not so elaborate for a 1,000 word picture book,
Mm,
but you
mhm.
keep writing these outlines and following them up. And I guess that's it. But the outline, they become the roadmap for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so would you say, because I mean, you've probably heard the expression of there's plotters and pantsers. And for those who are listening and aren't familiar, it's, plotters like to plot everything ahead of time. I think the most, I'm trying to remember most famous, we've got a blog post on this, but it's like most famous plotter and the most famous pantser. And I can't remember Stephen King. I feel like it's maybe a pantser, and James Patterson is maybe a plotter. But so plotter likes to plot everything ahead of time. Pantsers kind of like to more write by the seat of their pants and develop the story as it comes. Do you feel like you are you a plotter or a pantser? And does that change based on the type of book that you're writing?
No, I think I'm a little bit of both. I think I kind of plot it out, but then there's many places where I go by the seat of my pants, and I think you have to be able to switch between those two archetypes, if you want to call them that. Right now, I've finished the uh, first draft of the second um, George O'Keeffe book. It's called Mortal Radiance, and now I'm into the pantser part. I have beginning, middle, end, conclusion, but I gotta fill it out with more intrigue, and there could be a second murder that might happen.
Mm.
on, you know, things get a little bit more intricate when you're in the pantser part. Uh, yeah, so so I do both, but it starts with being the plotter.
Got it. Okay, so primarily a plotter, and then you've got some kind of ability to write by the seat of your pants as you work through the plot. And then it
Uh,
sounds like even tying together into multiple books. I'd love for you to speak on that. I mean, you've obviously done a bunch of series, and that's as a fiction author or children's book author that has writing any series author. One of the most important numbers is your read through rate, right?
yeah.
And what percentage of people who read book one are going to read book two? Percentage you're going to read book two or read book three, things like that. Is there anything that you've learned or that you do to increase that read through rate or to get people to kind of keep coming back from book to book?
Well, in the children's books, I've written a series about owls. I've written one about wolves, horses. I got one coming out about beavers, second one in the series. And um, there's always some unfinished business that's pretty obvious in the children's books. So, I know I'm going to pick it up there. Um, with the George O'Keeffe, because I'm just on the second book, uh, I don't know exactly what the unfinished business was. It's set in historical times, which is considered historical, the 1930s and the lead up to World War II. So that leaves a lot of things that can happen. The first book was set in 1934. This one is in 35. And so there is a kind of timeline to follow up to, 1941 when we got into World War II. So that's good. That's good. That gives me something to rely on. I love doing historical fiction. I wrote a whole lot of historical fiction for kids.
What do you like about it?
Well, the plots are there. That's the thing,
Mm.
it's history. So the characters are there. I wrote a series for Scholastic called Dear America. And oh my God, that was just so much fun to do. I had
Mm.
one, well, they were set in all different times. One in the Depression, one about the Pilgrims. And then they continued it into something called the Royal Diaries. Oh, and I'm just a fiend for history. I love history. I particularly love English history. So I wrote one about Queen Elizabeth I. And then I wrote a time travel one that was set in Tudor England and here in the United States.
That's cool. So it sounds like
Yeah.
some of the historical fiction, you've got your plot, you've got your characters, and you
Yeah.
almost have like this canvas that you can work with.
Yeah. And that's
And be creative.
actually the way I sort of feel with Light on Bone, because it is historical, the 1930s. I got the plot, I got the characters, there's Roosevelt, there's Hitler, there's all sorts of people.
Mm. So maybe switching gears just a little bit, and then I want to talk about the new book and a few things there. What you got the Owl series turned into major motion picture. How did you do it? How did that happen? I think this is like everyone's dream, right? And we just had Sarah McDermott come on episode 191 of the podcast and talk about like turning your book into a script. And it's this thing that I feel like keeps coming up. We had Stephen Pressfield on the podcast. He's talking about turning his book into a movie, and just it's a question that keeps getting asked, and thing that I think a lot of people are interested in. How'd you do it?
Well, I have an agent, a movie agent, and so she did it. And I know it surprises a lot of people. I didn't have to do too much because they don't want the author to do too much. They kind of take it over. But she worked a very good deal for me. where I got to be, what do they call it, associate producer. So
Oh, cool.
yeah, so I got paid that separate from the rights they paid for.
Oh, that's smart.
So associate producer assumes that you can raise your voice every now and then, say, "Hey, I don't like that." That's about all I could do. I didn't have to turn the book. They had to. And there was things they did that I wouldn't have done. But I'll tell you, it was so beautiful. I just couldn't complain. It's the most beautiful animation I've ever seen in a movie. I would just say it's the most beautiful animated movie ever. It was made by an Australian, well, Warner Brothers was the producers, but
Hmm.
they hired Animal Logic, which is a company that does animation, and they're in Australia, and they are absolute geniuses. And so it's not like I had to write Hollywood myself and convince them of this at all. It
Mm.
all kind of fell into place. Actually, I think what happened was one of the big producers at Warner Brothers found her kids' books, who had my books on the Owls of Gahul, and her kids were reading them like crazy. And so she went to my agent, and the rest is history. It was great. It was great. There were things I didn't like about the movie, but I won't tell you those things because I think that the movie itself is just a masterpiece.
Yeah. So it was the same agent. Is that typical? The same agent that works with you on your books will shop it to movies, or is it
No,
is
no, no. I have two agents. Actually, I have three agents. I have a children's book agent and I have a grown-up book agent. And then I have a movie agent who can do both children and grown. So it was my movie agent who did the album.
got it. So it was so that's interesting, and I think probably helpful for people to understand kind of the structure when you're traditionally publishing a large volume of books. So you said you've got a kids book agent or children's book agent that shops the children's books. You've got an adult book agent or grown-up book agent, and then you've got a movie agent specifically.
Who does both sides.
Got it. Got it. And so is that person shopping some of your other books, or is that a priority to keep turning some of your books into movies?
Well,
If
sure.
yeah.
But and she keeps trying. But as you know, it's very hard. And Hollywood's in a very weird state now with the streaming and all that. I mean, I don't know what's going on out there. But
Yeah.
she keeps trying. She sends a lot of things in. Sometimes we get a nibble. Sometimes, well, I've had options. I did a grown-up book years ago under a pseudonym called Night Gardening. And it's under the pseudonym of E.L. Swan and Swann. I think it's in like its eighth, what do you call it, option. This has been going on for 20 years now. I don't think it'll ever, but
Oh.
the options, the first option was pretty big. They keep going down, but it's still out there in play.
And for those who aren't familiar, an option is basically, okay, we have the ability to turn this into a movie, and we've got a 1-year option,
and we'll pay you for that. Yeah.
Got it. Oh, so they keep paying you for the ability to turn it into a movie and renewing the option, but they still haven't turned it into a movie?
Yeah. So the option isn't as big as it was 20 years ago. And then they try to whittle you down and do this. But you feel, well, at least it's out there in circulation.
Yeah.
Somebody might stumble across it.
That's really interesting. So let's talk about the new book, Light on Bone, adult mystery. Is this the first adult mystery that you've done, or have you done?
No, I had done a series years ago about very different from this book. It's about oh, let's see. It's about a children's book illustrator who lives in Cambridge. It's sort of almost my life, except I don't draw. And she starts solving murders, mysteries. She keeps stumbling
Oh,
bodies and things like that. And so I did 4 of those. They sold pretty well. And then I just got tired of doing them. And my children's book wasn't in book career wasn't in high gear at that point. And then it did get in high gear, especially with the Guardians of Gahul, Al books. And so I didn't do them for a while, for a long time. And then I don't know, something just made me come back, and I thought, I don't want to do those, but I always loved George O'Keeffe as a painter, and her life was so interesting. And I thought, boy, that would make a good thing. Amateur sleuth, that's what they call it when you're not a regular policeman or detective or something like that. You're an amateur sleuth. So your day job is totally different from this. And that was fun. And I also love the Southwest. So I just thought that would be a new territory to set it in. And George O'Keeffe was, she stumbles, she goes out there, and it's a sort of critical time in her life. She'd been out there before, but it was the first year she stayed at the Ghost Ranch. And she stumbles across a dead body in the desert, and it is the body of a priest. And so it all begins. But it's right in the 1930s, so there's German spies around and all this kind of stuff. A few characters, real life characters show up, like Charles Lindbergh and his wife. And it's interesting. I've written a lot of books about World War II for kids, YA books. So I know about a lot about World War II. So it's always fun to be able to use some knowledge that you've had because you've been exploring things and come
use
up
the
with
same
a new
knowledge, but in a different format.
in a different format, right?
Yeah.
And George O'Keeffe herself was such a fascinating character. I mean, I just loved her. So
Well,
that's
let's talk about maybe, so I think what's fascinating to me is, with children's books, you've got two kind of buyers, right? You've got the parent. So it's like it needs to be compelling enough that the parent wants to buy it and the kid wants to read it.
yeah.
And then with an adult mystery or any grown-up books, it's just way more straightforward. So how have you approached kind of light on bone, like both the positioning, I guess, the marketing, that sort of thing? How do you look at that differently from the way that you look at kind of marketing your children or young adult books?
Well, with the children's books, you're really basically, especially until they get to be YA books, you're marketing to the parents and largely to the moms. More moms belong to book groups that have, moms and children in them, or women's book groups, whatever. So you're basically marketing to them. And I don't do the marketing, but I was sort of lucky. A large part of my career, I've been involved with Scholastic, and they are dynamite in marketing because they have Scholastic book fairs. And you can sometimes see those big 18-wheeler trucks going around the country. And they're the book fair trucks, and they're bringing thousands of books to a public school that is having a book fair. And of course, they allow the school to share in the profits. So that is automatically made. There's nobody that has a marketing machine like Scholastic. So for the other books, they have, it's just marketing departments, and publicity departments, which vary. So especially these days, and with the pandemic, uh, you just can't rely on that much. I mean, you have to try and figure out a way to do the marketing yourself. And I'm not very good at that.
Mhm.
I'm not. And so I don't know what I'm doing in that
Yeah.
respect. I'm appearing on this show. Please, everybody, email your friends. Uh, I put up little interesting tidbits of find on my website, kathrynlasky.com. But I'm basically a lousy marketer. I'm a good interview, but I'm a
Mhm.
lousy, but I can't write my own ad copy. I
Yeah.
don't know how to go about that.
I mean, how do you think you've sold so many books then? If I mean, if I mean, you're obviously a great writer, but there's a lot of great writers whose books don't sell, right? How do you think
Not
you sold
all
so
of mine sell that well either.
many?
But,
Mhm.
I how do I sell so many books? Well, Scholastic book fairs, but Scholastic just does children's books. They don't do grown-up books.
Mhm.
And, the publicity and whatever you call it, department of these marketing departments of big publishers, I I try to give them ideas and I hope they listen and all of that. But I,
Yeah.
whether they do, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
very hard.
Yeah. Any any lessons? Well, because you said so, not all your books sell well. I guess maybe outside of the book that was
All
turned into a
sell well.
movie.
They don't all sell well. Most
Yeah.
of them sell well.
Yeah. And so what, like I guess because I think that's pretty common as an author, right? And a lot of people think, oh, if someone's a successful author, all of their books must do well. But it's the
No,
80-20 principle. Every author, no matter how successful, is going to have a couple of those books that just outsell all the other ones. Have you noticed any commonalities with your books that sell a lot more copies, or any rhyme or reason that you've seen behind the ones that sell a whole lot more?
not really. I don't. And I I I mean I think animal books sell pretty well. I've done a lot of animal books, and I'm starting to think now. See, a lot has changed in the children's book world, where, and I think this is right in some ways, but in other ways, I don't. They are trying to find books that have more by more people of color and books that deal with transgender, gay people, and all of that. And I think that is vital. Uh, I myself don't think that you have to be Black or Asian or trans or bisexual or gay to write that book, because writing is essentially an act of imagination. And you can't tell me that I can't imagine what that is like. I can. I'm an artist. I'm a writer. I had a great idea for a book that was sort of sci-fi-ish, and it was about two sisters, but one was a clone of another one, of a regular non-clone person. And they meet up. They hadn't ever met. They'd been kept separate. And when they meet up, this is an interesting situation, but the clone, they're both girls, they the clone feels that she's transgender. So when that was pitched to the publishing house, the editor said something like, well, no, we can't take this because Kathryn's not transgender. And I asked my agent, I said, how do they know? How do they know I'm not transgender? And, my agent said, well, that's a good question. How do they know? I mean, I'm not, but I just thought that's just very limited way of thinking about writing
Hmm.
and how somebody writes and why they write and
Hmm.
all of that. But I do understand we need more books out there that deal with those subjects. Now, whether the person who writes them is the right color or not, as long as they're a good writer, I don't see why not.
Hmm. Hmm. I mean, I guess similarly to how, not having for you to write a book about World War II, not having to have fought in World War II, but be able to study that and write that and capture that and crystallize that into your writing. That's
I've written 5 books about World War II, and nobody has ever asked me if I fought in it.
Hmm.
But I was a huge history buff as a kid. I was
Mm-hmm.
fascinated. My uncle was in the Battle of the Bulge. Uh, my aunt was away, the Women's Auxiliary something or other force during the war. My much older cousin was in Patton's army. I grew up reading all those books. I
Hmm.
didn't.
Well, hey, tell me about what type of person would like or is the new book ideal for? So Light on Bone, what type of person might be interested in that? Where can people go buy it
Well, they
and
can
check
buy
out
it
this
on
one?
Amazon. Light on Bone. I think women in particular would like it. I think his buffs would like it, and certainly art history people would
Mm-hmm.
love it because
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like a peek into her inside life, her
Mm-hmm.
interior life. And I I read immense amounts of stuff about George O'Keeffe. So, but I particularly think, well, I thought it was mostly a women's book.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not thinking that because I'm getting a lot of email from guys. And so it's
Amateur sleuths.
yeah, amateur sleuths. I don't know,
But
but
I'm like, I mean, do you think that demographic is interested in it? And I mean, maybe is that the commonality of the guys who are reading it? Is that's something that they're personally interested in, therefore that's interesting to them about the book.
oh, about the amateur sleuth aspect, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know whether that would particularly appeal to men more than women. I think just that it's grounded in a fascinating historical period. And there are plenty of men in the book too.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's it. But uh, yeah, anyhow, who knows? I'm
Yeah.
not, a marketing analyst or whatever.
Well, Kathryn, this has been awesome. What would be your parting piece of advice, knowing what you know now, 100 books later, to the Kathryn of, prior to writing your first book, or any of the other Kathryns out there who are thinking about writing their children's book or adult novel or young adult fiction?
Well, that's interesting because I think my advice would be don't follow the market. Don't, because this is the rage now, think you have to write about that. Don't follow the market. Follow your own instincts about what you feel makes good writing. And what I feel makes good writing is a subject that really seizes you, that you can live with for years, months, whatever. And that if you have procedures that work for you, like for me, outlining is very important, but I'm not bound by it. I'm flexible. And one of the first things I do to get rolling is I write the book jacket copy. because book jacket copy is fabulous. It's usually 100 words or less, and it's kind of gets the pithiness of the story, what's going to grab a reader. So first you write that book jacket copy, then you expand that into some sort of outline, and then you might be expanding it into subsequent outlines.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's a fun process.
Yeah, it is. It is.
That's smart. Well, hey, thank you so much, Kathryn. This is amazing. Light on Bone.
Yeah.
Check it out on Amazon or anywhere you buy books. Kathryn, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you could be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode.